So welcome all, Vishnu, Rohan and Prabjeet to this webinar on blurring lines between business and social business. And welcome to all other participants. Okay, I'll put the initial, the ground rules first. So what we have is, we have a introductory note by all the three panel members first. Before that, I'll just give you the background on the topic. And once the panel members put their initial thoughts, we will take this discussion further through some sequence of questions, which I'll shoot to different panel members. And then through their answers, we will take this discussion forward. So with that note, welcome all. At the onset, what I want to tell you is a small story. Back in 1970s, two companies by the name IBM and Goodwill International. As you know, IBM is a for-profit business enterprise. Goodwill Enterprise was a non-profit enterprise which was helping the people to upskill themselves to get better employability based out of the US. So in 70s, it was very fashionable for the IBM employees to dedicate their weekend time in charity works or charity works for this enterprise. And also they used to donate as charities. But once this weekend's gone and when they move back to their normal lives at IBM, they really don't care about these charitable acts that they did, and they all move ahead with their life. And neither the Goodwill Enterprise International did not thought much about this association between IBM and Goodwill. Now, come 2007, now this Goodwill Enterprise has become or transformed or evolved to become a 2.2 billion enterprise, $2.2 billion US enterprise with more than 2,000 stores selling merchandise made by their support people to the local public. And look at IBM. IBM has transformed itself to be one of the national icon of public education by supporting Women in Technology group and coming up with engineering boot camps for the middle school girls. So we're talking about for-profits becoming $2.2 billion companies, non-profits becoming $2.2 billion companies, and for-profit companies embracing a lot of social works or social business works. So this is the onset at which I want to start this discussion. Since, I also want to put this thing upfront that the idea of this webinar or the topic came actually from one of the sessions that we had from Vishnu way back in 2015 when he came to inaugurate the Social Entrepreneurship Club of Rajagiri College. He was of a vehement opinion that, look, there will be a tomorrow where there is no business as business. It has to merge with the social value creation. So I would want to put on record my thanks to Vishnu for instigating the thought at that point of time, so that we are having this discussion today. So with that introductory note, I would welcome the order will be Vishnu will do the first. Rohan will put in the thoughts second, and then finally will be done by Prabjeet. So over to Vishnu.
Thank you, Abhilash. I've always been of the opinion that social and business, the lines have to get blurred more and more, and we are seeing that it's happening all around the world. If you actually go back to why businesses are originally created, it is to solve a social need for the communities, right? Meaning there is a problem, they want to solve the problem in a significant way. But I think somewhere along the line, the inequality started creeping up, where the people who started these businesses, who are really the ones who are the entrepreneurs, kind of became super successful, and wealth started tipping on one side, and the wealth inequality started showing up. Now, that's kind of when the whole social movement started, and the social entrepreneurship also started. So I think I just want to kind of place a couple of ideas, which I probably also touched upon when I visited you some time back, Abhilash, but maybe just to refresh the memories of others who are new here as well. So, the first one I really want to talk about is the concept of intellectual property, right? So, when you talk about the concept of intellectual property in a business environment, we all know that businesses grow by the amount of IP they actually own, the amount of IP they hold, and every single IP they create, even every patent they file, there is a valuation attached to it. The company's value grows up based on the number of patents and copyrights they have. But what we are beginning to see is that obviously in the social sector, it's the exact diametrical opposite, where there is no concept of intellectual property in the social world. People really let go of their idea because they want people to copy. And, we use, Ashoka, we use one interesting metric, which I want to place it in front of all of you. We call it independent replication. The more people are able to take your ideas and run with themselves, we call it independent replication. The more the people are able to copy your idea becomes more successful. So it's almost like they say, imitation is a form of, praise, right? So it's like, the more people copy you, it's really success of the idea. So let me just give you one little example here of a social organization. So Takashi is a social entrepreneur in Japan. I can give you a lot of examples in India, but let me just give you an example of Japan. Like, in Japan, in 2010, 11 times, he felt that, there's so many people getting diagnosis of healthcare issues much later in life. So he wanted to kind of, create a way where people can get diagnosed much ahead of their time, right? So, so preventive diagnosis is helpful. Now, obviously, he started an organization called CarePro. So CarePro became very popular. The only model he tried was, he said, I'm going to use CarePro to be available in department stores. It's going to be available in street corners. It's like a vending machine. People just can go and get themselves tested, right? And in 2014, interestingly, the government of Japan saw this opportunity, and then they changed the legislation by saying, changing the way people can get diagnosed. Now, in 2020, there are 1,600 competitors for this idea in Japan. CarePro was the originator, but 1,600 different businesses are using the same model of remote diagnosis. But CarePro is still around, and Takashi is not upset that, people are copying him, right? Because he is enabling people to copy. So I think, I just want to kind of end with one sort of a narrative here is another key important factor in a social business is scaling up of the organization versus scaling up of the idea. It's no longer important to scale your organization alone, right? Are you driven towards scaling the idea, right? So here I would give you a for-profit example of Tesla Motors, right? Meaning we all know Tesla, we all love Tesla, the cars are beautiful, amazing, right? But not many of us know that, I quoted this example earlier as well, all their patents are open source now. You can literally go online and find all their patents you can copy. Like, Tesla is not going to come and sue you, right? But somebody asked Elon Musk why he was doing this, because he said, the idea is not about Tesla anymore. It's about the electric car industry. Can you transform the electric car industry versus scaling up Tesla alone? Can you scale up the idea of microcredit versus scaling up Grameen Bank, right? Can you scale up the idea of child labor being abolished than scaling up his own organization like what Kailash Satyarthi stopped doing, right? So what we have to do is we have to look at the idea and the organization. The minute we let go of the idea, of the organization, the idea starts to grow. That's the concept of scale and balancing between social and regular businesses. We can talk a little more, but I'm going to stop here.
Great. Thanks, Vishnu, for that wonderful, nice outlay that you put forth for the discussion. Rohan, you have something to share from your experience and what you've seen.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here. I want to start by saying, that the way government looks at businesses has evolved. There was a time seniors of ours and many of our senior colleagues. And when we were in the academy, IS academy around 11 years ago, this that generation of bureaucrats, the 60s and the 70s, they were almost told that you have to keep an arm's length from business, you have to keep an arm's length from the private sector, and they viewed the private sector suspiciously. Now that's changed, that's evolved. I think the evolution started sometime in the 90s, and now we are working hand in hand with the private sector. If you look at the ministries at the central government, or even now they are even there in the state level. In my organizations, both the organizations, in fact, whether it was the Department of Information Technology, which I held till last week, and even in the skill development mission, I've seen that we are working hand in hand with private players. We have a stake working with them. So that is my thing on business. But when we talk about these merging lines between business and social business, there's this talk about how businesses have to become, if you're producing a good or a service which has a positive externality, whether it's a social good or something to do with environmental cause, and profit is and you need profits to sustain it, then it becomes a social enterprise or a social good. But I think there are various models of this. There's not one fixed model. So we need to be very, very clear. There are many, there's a full continuum on this. There could be a person who's into making products and services in a socially sustain, and for its financials, and generating profits while doing this. So that is one part. There could also be cases in which there are firms which are doing something serving a social objective, but not compromising on its on their work expectations in any way. For example, people of especially able people being employed in hotels these days, or and then it's not that you do it with a sense of with a sense of sympathy. No, they're treated as equals, they're trained, and then so you're achieving these objectives. So there's a full continuum. We associate certain good things with business, and certain things with business, and certain things with social business. So social business is externalities, equity, doing something for the greater good, and then you have business, which you talk about efficiency, profits, and also associated with cutting edge evolution of technology and all. So we have and there's this talk that more businesses should try to become like social businesses and should take the best thing out of social businesses. That's one common, and that's the common narrative, right? But as somebody who's in government, I also see this other side to it, in which I feel social businesses, there are things which are done in the name of social business, and especially education and health are primary examples of this, where the social aspect of course remains, because that's what the primary activity is, but often profit often oversteps the social objective, and private education or private universities are an example of that. And some of them which are not and even private, there are a lot of complaints like that about private hospitals as well. So as much as we talk about mutually beneficial exchange of from between businesses and social businesses also have this other side to it, where we need to regulate them better for them to deliver their social objectives really well. That aspect is also there. So they need to, and then there's this other side in which often there's some very good things which business gives to social business, like efficiency, best practices, technology, later adoption of latest, things. So on that aspect, often in the name of social objectives, certain social enterprises hide behind it. We don't have so many funds, so we can't do this. And so therefore, larger point I'm trying to make is that as much as often businesses are encouraged to go onto the social side, the social businesses also should be encouraged to pick the best from the business side of things as well. So there's this thing which we need to recognize, that balance ought to be maintained. So having said this, I'd like to just say, there are a set of, maybe later in the discussion, I would like to talk more about, my own my own experiences while dealing, like in the skill development, it is totally run. The ecosystem has been constructed in such a way that it is mainly private sector led. So you have small companies, small entrepreneurs who actually gotten into skill development, and they work with a profit motive, but at the end of the day, they are fulfilling a social need, which is that of providing employability. So that is one thing. And even in the IT side of things, same thing. You have many examples of these local entrepreneurs being working in the villages. They're working with a profit motive. The other, the Lok Mitra Kendras, they're called LMKs in our state. I think they're called something else. They're called E-Mitras in various states. In every panchayat, you'll have one. And he's providing services to the village folk at very, very minimal prices. He's giving access, so you don't really have to go far away to some government office to get your work done. But then he charges you, and he charges your rate, and he's financially sustainable. So there are these various, and there are various models of these kinds which we have worked with in government, and which take the best of both. So that is where I would want to say, that is where I would want to stop and maybe get a perspective from others. And then in the discussion, I would like to make a few points more.
Great, Rohan. Thanks so much for that wonderful elaboration of your experiences. Prabjeet, sorry I put you on the last, not because I don't like you, because I know that you have done your homework really well and you have a lot of things to say about this topic. So Prabjeet, all yours.
Thanks, Abhilash, and thank you for having me. And I think thanks for putting me in the order you did, because it gave me a chance to truly appreciate the framing which Vishnu and Rohan did. And I couldn't agree more with some of the points they made, and I'll kind of touch upon that with a bit of an example. I think my perspective from somebody who's been very closely involved in the corporate world, first as an advisor to companies and then very deeply as an operator over the last 5 years, I think there are three learnings I have from that limited experience. Learning number one is that there is value in acknowledging that the world of business, and Rohan touched upon that a little bit from the point of efficiency, everybody is a certain specialization and value to it. The government adds value in its own way. Private enterprises have had value in their own way. And magic happens when everybody does and brings to the table what they do best versus try to influence or start doing what others may be good at. Right? Today, to Vishnu's point, Elon Musk can't get in and shape EV framework for the US government or for the Chinese government, but he can bring the best of technology and thinking around that. So I think that is something which will always resonate. Second is, to me, the relationship between business, community, society is very, very symbiotic. And I think increasingly a lot more, where no longer can businesses decouple themselves and focus only on a single identity or goal of profit generation or shareholder value maximization. I still remember during my B school days, shareholder value maximization was still called out the number one goal. But when I talk to management thinkers today, or even as I sit in some of the corporate boardrooms, that is one of the goals. But it is always starts with a mission or a vision, which absolutely talks about a more holistic view. I think just very encouraging to see that. And the third to me is what eventually the proof is in the pudding. And I do believe that while it is desirable for the boundaries to get blurred, we should not, and nobody in the ecosystem should force that to happen. It should happen organically, and that's where the best returns happen. Just to give a few examples of that from the world of Uber, which has kind of been my home for the last 5 years. I think Uber is a business which by design is so integral to the core fabric of a city, which means and when you are moving people and you are providing a mobility service, you are so deeply embedded in how the government works and the policies around that, on how you end up impacting and creating an experience which impacts millions of people just by the act of existing. Today, Uber globally provides livelihood opportunities to more than 4 million driver partners, right? And we are not a social enterprise. We are a commercially oriented enterprise. But just by the fact of what the technology platform tries to do, there is a livelihood creation. Just in India, there are 500,000 odd driver partners who are earning a living, which is thereby 2 million people, right? Say 4 members of a family who are dependent on the technology enabling somebody to become a micro entrepreneur. What this also kind of resonates or comes together is to the point Vishnu made around on a day-to-day basis, what does the company do to enable a much more deeper community connect? Where we have to the idea of open source, which Vishnu spoke about. One of the things we have started doing is, and which we've done a lot in India already, is to say, look, we are sitting on tons of information and data. Who travels where? What time do they travel? If I look at aggregated anonymized data, what if I can share it with the civic planners, with academicians, who can then actually use it to make some sense in city planning? We all recognize city planning for us as a big challenge in markets like India, where systems and data is not that easily available. What if I can bring that together? It does not cost me much. Already have engineers and data scientists sitting who can make those tools easily available. And so we went ahead and created a tool called Uber Movement, which is a publicly available free resource, which any researcher can sign on and get access to get aggregated and anonymized information. So for example, we have been able to say, look, if you build a flyover project from between point X to Y, what has been the impact on the traffic patterns? Now, 10 years back, that information wasn't available. Today, that can give a real reason to a policymaker like Rohan to really say, look, we made an investment, whether it was worth it and whether it achieved the objective it set out to do. So I think there are multiple ways some businesses, by just their core objective, are able to add dramatic value to the community. And then through multiple things they may do over and above. Through the course of the discussion, I'm happy to bring to light some more examples of, I think, given something which is very recent in our mind is COVID, right? And how different companies have actually used the opportunity. They may not be social enterprises, but they have brought forward their capabilities, whether it be technology, infrastructure, manpower, to help the country during this period, often partnering with government stakeholders. So let's bring some of those examples through the course of the conversation.
Great, Prabhjit. Yes, I understand that there is monetary implications on the policy level of the infrastructure developments that we do. But in one of the recent Stanford Innovation articles, it was said that Starbucks saves 36 million in terms of human cost. Okay, just because their employees don't leave the company because they feel the kind of social responsible projects that they do makes them more satisfied. Now, from a value creation point of view, is this new way of thinking about the social businesses has helped Uber, or has it, or do you use such kind of yardsticks in your own analysis about the value creation of your company?
I think, look, eventually when you do something which is more driven by a socially responsible effort, you don't, often many of them have a spillover impact which you recognize over a period of time. Just to give you like a couple of examples, I think very recently during the COVID crisis, when the country was in lockdown, there were no mobility options available. Public transport was shut, ride sharing services were shut, and we had the need to have hundreds and thousands of COVID frontline workers to travel. Right, they needed to get to their place of work, hospitals, labs, etc. One of the things which we did in partnership with many state governments was to make available our technology and our supply base and launch a service called Uber Medic, which is to just help healthcare workers travel. Now, here's what's the interesting part. While during the period of that of the lockdown, that was a service which we provided in many cases free, and it provided a real benefit to the community. What's interesting is, as lockdown has kind of got scaled back, many of the healthcare providers, many of the state governments where we provided that service have come back and said, look, we actually appreciated what you did. We saw a real value, which otherwise we had not got a chance to experience. Could you now extend that as a full revenue model over a period of time where you provide that service for next multiple few quarters? Now, here is suddenly something which we would have done to serve the community with a clear intent to just kind of focus on that window, has led to almost a new business opportunity opening up, which could also then create more earning opportunities for a driver partner. Another example of that is how we kind of think of what I described as the Uber movement tool, right? Where a public source, which is Uber incurs the cost, makes the data available. Researchers like yourself can tap into that. In addition to kind of publishing white papers, etc., what that has led us to do is we have actually got a chance to sit across the table with multiple policymakers and say, look, based on the data which you and I both have access to, here is something interesting we are seeing, which is there is one geography within Delhi NCR, which there are tons of people who are wanting to travel to this location, but because of lack of public transport, you can clearly see that data is suggesting that they have had to wait much longer to get a vehicle, which is a ride-sharing vehicle. Or you can also see that there is a real chance to kind of improve connectivity over here. So could we introduce our service, which is, say, innovative two-wheeler service, say a bike taxi service, to provide that? Now, here is where what started off as a truly socially oriented data sharing effort creates a dialogue in a completely unbiased manner, which allows us to then serve from a business perspective, and not just us, but actually allows multiple players in the category, including our competitors, to serve. Right, to Vishnu's point, it's not just what Tesla is growing. We should have everybody in the EV industry grow, and everybody benefits from that. So I think the interlinkages are actually very tight, and often then over a period of time, this becomes a DNA of how business leaders who are running companies start thinking of the choices they make to say, look, I'm not doing it purely to get a social ROI. I'm doing it because we'll have social ROI. And maybe at some point, it will also spill over to the business in a positive way.
Great, Pradeep. Yes, I understand that, that positive spillover would actually create another business model for you, and, best of luck with that, to make it a good model. Just to continue the discussion, I'll move on to Rohan now. Now, in your experience as a policy maker or a policy implementer rather, do the thought of private player or private firms as a stakeholder, and I'm talking about as a stakeholder, has it occurred to you multiple times, or does it really happen often that you think of them as stakeholders rather than just participants?
Yes. So I like to answer it this way. I'll say, again, this is even if you are to compare the way we used to think way back in 2011, 2010 to the way we think now, I think things have changed a lot. I'd just like to say that definitely. So, if you talk about stakeholder, absolutely, we take them absolutely as stakeholders. I'll give you 3 distinct examples from 3 departments in which I've worked in the last 3 years. A first example I'd like to give from the skill development side of things, in which very clearly, we have skill infrastructure. We're in the process of building skill infrastructure, but those days are long gone. I've spoken to my senior colleagues in the service, and whenever we talk about, okay, we're going to create these structures, who's going to run them? Are we going to let the government run it, in which you'll have posts being created and the finance department saying, okay, we approve it, and then you have this entire conventional way of hiring, recruiting people, and then at the end of the day too, you don't really know, you are not really confident about the outcomes you'll produce. So we are very clear, whatever new skill infrastructure we're building up, we are reaching out to private partners in that, and not people who are just going to be people who have people who are going to be actually having a stake in running it for sustained periods of time. So an example of this would be the Center of Excellence for Tourism, Hospitality and IT, which we are making near Shimla right now. This project is an ADB funded project, and the Asian Development Bank has actually quite agreed to our proposal of actually not only funding the construction of it, but also funding the operational expenses for a period of 3 years, which is the first of its kind. It normally doesn't do it. It leaves the operational expenses for the government because the government will run it. But we told them no. We sat down with them, and we said, if we really want quality outcomes, if we want the quality to be maintained, we need a good world, somebody who's got international experience operator. Because what's happened is, I don't want the new skill centers to just be run like an ordinary as is, where is, basis that, it's okay, we don't really care about outcomes. But the moment we have within the government, if we are regulating and implementing, there's a conflict of interest. It becomes very difficult for us even to demand outcomes. That's the whole problem with government schools. That's the problem with government hospitals. It becomes very difficult to demand outcomes from them. But if you have a private player who you are paying on market rates, it's a business opportunity for him, then you structure your deal in such a way that you get the outcomes from him. How many placements? We want minimum placements of this level. This is the exposure. This is the internships we want to do. So this is the new model for sure. This is one example in skilling. So in skilling, we are absolutely clear to make infrastructure is definitely the government's domain, but it's not the government's role to be skilling people. It doesn't have the expertise. To regulate and monitor is okay. The second example I would want to give is that from the information technology department, where we do where Aadhaar enrollments is one of the primary functions. Himachal Pradesh has is more than 100% Aadhaar enrollments. In fact, it's ranked third all over the country in terms of more than the registration rate. However, Aadhaar registration and updation is a continuous activity, and there was this talk that should we give this work to government departments to do? Should schools be doing it? And is that the reason why you have teachers in schools is not to be doing Aadhaar work? They're supposed to teach. The doctors are also supposed to treat patients and not do Aadhaar enrollment. So we said, so there was this option which came to us that, okay, why don't we do, we hire a private vendor who will deploy his manpower for the generation of Aadhaars, which is a normal conventional business model. We said, no, we're not going to do that. We are going to use Lok Mitra Kendras. In Himachal, we have got 3,300 panchayats. We have close to 4,000 people covering these panchayats for these e-mitras or the Lok Mitra Kendras. We're going to give them this additional activity on commercial basis. So let's add to their sustainability. They are already tied up with us in terms of all our other activities. So why don't use them for this as well? So we want to encourage these models of social business by even giving them other conventional streams of income. The third example is something which is not yet been implemented, but it is from the latest department. So it's just luck, Prabjeet had mentioned about town planning, and I've just taken over as director of the town planning department. So now this, you have this huge issue of maps being approved of people. Most of the people have plot sizes in the range of 100 square meters to 500 square meters, and 90% of the approvals are at that stage, and they happen right at the primary level of the planning officer. So here you have accusations of rent seeking often, inefficiency, delay. And so there's this proposal, and the government has actually made a budget announcement this year in which they've said that, these small cases, we're going to register architects who are registered with the government, we would give these powers to them. Let them approve the map. They're registered with us. They're registered with their respective associations. So I'm not saying that and of course they will charge. They will charge definitely. But in view of the illegal, rampant illegal constructions which are going around, it's better to have this system in which you have efficient paid services, in which the government realizes that, okay, we are not really doing this in the most efficient way. So let's put a regulatory system in place, and we ensure that the architects do it in the fastest possible way, and we give the choice to the consumer. So this is a third way in which he's doing a job which is, in the overall context, it is meeting a social objective of environmentally sustainable buildings and town planning. And yet it is not the government which is doing it. I'm thinking about solutions outside government for it. So these are three examples which I want to give. Talking about how this has evolved over time, as I'm saying, in 2011, when I was working as a block development officer, which is at the really micro level, cutting edge level, when I'm talking to village pradhans, and I had an area of something like, 60,000 people with whom I was doing grassroots level implementation of Manrega, then SGSY and all these schemes. And we used to have a component of training it used to be called Sampurn Grameen Swarozgar Yojana at that stage. It later on became the NRLM. What we found is we used to train people and then forget about it. We never thought anything, we had this budget which had to be spent. We would do a small training program and forget about it. It's not like that anymore. There is a very conscious attempt that you need to get them credit, you need to get them accredited, certification and placement. So the point is, and for that, government again can't do it. It needs private partners. So I'm just saying, making this point again and again, that mindsets in government are changing. Government has to move with the times, and definitely, as Prabjeet said, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So you have to actually do it before you realize what is possible and what is not. So everything is not going to give you a short success, but it has to be tried. It's just without too much risk to the officer's personal career, obviously. So I just like to rest my case there.
I'd like to put this in. No, in your experience, whether it is McKinsey or Uber or anything else, have you ever came across a situation of you transformed your views as the word stakeholder means to you? I mean, normally when we say stakeholder, there is some say on what we do or what we implement. But has it occurred to you that this word stakeholder has undergone a transformation in your lives?
Is that for me?
No, Prajit. That is Prajit.
I think it indeed has. It indeed has. I would say a decade back, if you were to ask business in India, who are your top three stakeholders, it would typically start with my shareholders, my customers, and my employees. And an order may change, right? Again, I'm saying it for a subset of companies. I'm sure there have always been companies which have had a more outward focus. I think increasingly as I speak with different companies, there is a very real outward focus which is coming through. And I increasingly hear the community as a big stakeholder. I increasingly hear the environment as a big part of almost a stakeholder, almost an entity which doesn't have a name, a face, etc. But almost it's a given that whatever you do has to be something which is sustainable. So for example, one of the things that we have been, I would say, struggling or debating for the last couple of quarters, and it's not an easy answer, and why the trade-off happens. As somebody who is an integral part of the mobility ecosystem, right? On one side, we are obsessed about utilizing existing assets and saying, how do we drive them more so that no more vehicles have to be added and the same vehicle can be used 10, 12, 15 times a day, and thereby in the process, take more vehicles off the road. But there is also there's a point of view in the discussion which we have is to say, look, does the fact that an existence of an Uber or Ola in the market add more vehicles to the road, and that is add to the traffic congestion? Now, we can do multiple scientific studies to truly figure out. One argument is, look, this has encouraged people to not take the private vehicles out, which otherwise would have been clogging the roads, taking away parking space, etc. People are not buying a second vehicle or the first vehicle, and that's helping. And there's an argument which says, there are consumers who otherwise may have used public transport are now actually upgrading because the convenience and the affordability is so compelling. This, and I think another second debate, and I'll come to how we are resolving this, is to say, what is the role which we have, or the obligation we have to play in electrification? Because obviously electric vehicles are very critical to long-term sustainability. But here is the dilemma right now is that the EV ecosystem in India has not developed. The cost of putting an EV vehicle on the road is 2x for that of a regular vehicle. Now, who should be the one funding that effort? Unlike China, the Indian government and ecosystem, and for reasons which are truly around resources, we will not be able to depend on the government to commit those resources. The private sector, we as a platform, also are constrained on the resources. So who should be the one playing that role, right? Now, I think the judgment which we arrived at is to say, look, we have to be a catalyst in driving the shift towards lesser ownership of vehicles and towards electrification. Unfortunately, we will not be able to carry the entire burden of that. But does that mean that I am in any way looking at a different set of stakeholders? It's a balance. I'm looking at solving for what my shareholders can do in terms of funding initiative like this, and at the same time being thoughtful enough to recognize I have an obligation to create something which is more sustainable, which is something which will be greener, something which will fast forward the future. So I think we will, in our kind of boardroom discussions, we always would be having that discussion to say, look, we'll have to do the right thing. So in London, where the ecosystem is developing faster, we are actually charging riders and saying, for every trip you do today on a non-EV vehicle, you have to pay a specific premium, which goes towards a fund, which will then be used to deploy that to buy more vehicles, because somebody has to fund that. So we find innovative ways to be able to kind of create that. And that trade-off on who the stakeholders is a real debate. I think I'm actually glad that increasingly that debate is happening in the boardrooms. And there will never be a case that there's only one stakeholder. It will never be the community. It will never be only the shareholder. It will have to be a balance between the two, and a healthy debate in boardrooms in management decisions is something which everybody should be encouraging right now.
Great. Vishnu, I'll come back to you now. Vishnu, managing stakeholders, or rather managing multifaceted stakeholders, multiple kinds of stakeholders, comes very naturally to any social entrepreneurship initiative. And in that sense, Ashoka is really doing a lot of things in terms of managing these multiple kinds of stakeholders. Now, in your experience, is there something that the problem or the solution came from a completely unnoticed or completely unexpected charter, which then made you to call that particular portion of society also as a stakeholder?
Yeah, actually, even before we talk about this question, what you're asking, I really wanted to underscore what Prabjeet and Rohan said earlier, right? So, I think the first most important thing in any stakeholder work is to understand that people can learn from each other. Just the capacity building aspect is so critical, and that's kind of what Rohan was pointing to. And Prabjeet very clearly mentioned that, the very basic thing of any stakeholders or working with people is to recognize that everyone has a specialization, right? Everyone can bring something to the table and people can learn from each other, right? So given all of this, I personally would like to call working with stakeholders, and one principle sort of I use in my own personal work is what I call the unusual allies. Right? Meaning people who are really unusual to your work, right? You would have never thought that this person could kind of add value to yourself. And sometimes these unusual allies are hiding in plain sight. And, and I feel that sometimes as businesses, government, even social organizations, we tend to quickly pass over them and think that they wouldn't be able to add any value. I'm going to give an example here, right? So we were talking about malnutrition, right? So, we were addressing this issue of malnutrition in the communities. And obviously, right, if you look at it, the companies, the government put a lot of effort in making sure that, for example, iron folate pills were available at large, right? Meaning everybody has access to iron folate pills. Now, we did a study and we found out that these iron folate pills during pregnancy is very, very critical. And, pregnant women need to have it because, anemia, it reduces anemia and the baby will be well and all of that. So, and we found that amazingly, the most rural parts of Karnataka, these iron folate pills were available at abundance. Whenever the pregnant women needed it, the Asha workers, the health workers were giving those pills. There is no question about it. But unfortunately, what we realized is that we asked another question, like, do you take these pills? They said yes. And we asked them, how frequently do you take these pills? They said, we take, maybe a pill or two a week. And we were like, what? You take a pill or two a week? That's crazy. You're supposed to have at least 2 pills a day, right? So why are you not taking these pills, right? Now, obviously here, if you take this situation, right, the key stakeholder for us is actually the beneficiary, right? Meaning the beneficiary is the key stakeholder. How many times when we define something or we design something, do we really go and listen to the key stakeholder, right? That's where design thinking and all of these new ideas come in. But I have realized across, we worked on affordable housing together, Abhilash. There we found that the women who were actually the eventual people using the affordable houses were not considered in designing the affordable house, right? Or, for example, the women in this case who were really in the community eating these pills were not considered. The third one, I'll give you an example, is, midday meal scheme, right? The government is doing an amazing work. Akshay Patra is doing an amazing work. All the stakeholders are doing an amazing work as to midday meal, making sure the midday meal is available to the kid in the rural area, right? But the question is, who cooks the midday meal apart from Akshay Patra? Akshay Patra does a majority in certain areas, but still more than 80% of the midday meals today in India are cooked by community workers in the school area, in the community, and deliver to the school, right? How many times have we kind of designed based on what they have as a capacity, right? What is cleanliness for them? How do we train them to kind of cook the right food? So the stakeholder becomes that person, right? So for us, we want to make sure that everybody who's involved comes in. And the last point I would say is that when I talk about unusual allies, I have realized that, we don't bring in, for example, a quantum physicist to solve a community problem. We don't bring in an economist who has won a Nobel Prize to kind of solve affordable housing situation. We don't do these things because we feel that, hey, they are too far away from this reality, right? But, or a space, the classic example you and me have worked on is, design of space inside an affordable house. Who is the best person to design a space inside an affordable house? Can you bring a Japanese architect to work in the Indian affordable housing scenario? Why not? Because they know how to deal with small spaces. You go to a Japanese hotel, today all the space is so tiny, but it's so optimized, right? But why can't we bring the same sort of certain knowledge back to India? So I'm saying stakeholders can have to come from multiple dimensions, and and unusual allies is my sort of mantra when I work with stakeholders.
Great for that unique perspective on stakeholders. I'll come back to Prabjeet again now. Prabjeet, you mentioned about the drivers as driver partners, and is there something unique in addressing them as driver partners, or is there something that you do differently when you frame them into the driver partner as a word? Is there something that you think and act differently for those 500,000 people that we employed with Uber?
Thanks for asking this question, Abhilash. This is something which is very close to my heart. Look, at the end of the day, the face of what the service we provide is actually a driver partner. They are the ones who, when you press a button, the magic happens and the vehicle suddenly pops in right outside your doorstep. We are just actually providing the technology. And it is somebody else who owns the vehicle, somebody who is being trained by us through multiple means, but is turning up to provide that service, is actually welcoming you into their own private space and providing that service. So we always at Uber, I think culturally, have been very focused on from day one calling them driver partners, because it reinforces to every single stakeholder in the Uber system. Even when we were 300 employees to now when we are 25,000 employees, that who is the person who actually does the magic on our behalf. I think this is almost a cultural choice which we made. I remember when I joined Uber 5 years back in 2015, one of the first things which in my orientation I was told was, at Uber, we give high fives to riders and hugs to drivers. And that hit me, right? Riders are consumers. They are the paying customers that, everybody should be obsessed about them. What do you mean by we give high fives to riders, but we give hugs to drivers? I think that in some form underscores the value of the relationship. Now, what does it mean, right? One is, it's not, you can, tomorrow I start calling somebody something, and does that change anything? No, it's about following up with real practices and actions which underscore what commitment we make. I think that there are 3 or 4 things which we have kind of signed up on and we kind of live by. One is to make sure that we have community policies which are balanced. Most customers, most companies would often obsess about the customers who have the biggest voice. Our riders tend to have more access to social media. They tend to tell us more publicly and vocally about trips that didn't go well, or trips where they were cancelled on, or trips where it was an unpleasant experience. Often, our driver partners don't get forums like that. So I think one of the things internally we are very clear is we will be fair and objective in assessing every single rider-driver dispute. We will apply the same judgment uniformly. So unknown to many people is, while we may take actions against drivers for certain erring behaviors or patterns, we also take actions against riders who actually end up spoiling the platform. And for example, the rating which you give to a driver at the end of a trip, there's also a driver ensuring that he or she gives a rating to a rider at the end of the trip. which allows us to, through algorithms, figure out what the right thing to do to keep the platform safe is. So that's one, give them a fair and equal stance on the platform. Second is, which is a very big effort we make, is around humanizing our driver partners, particularly in India. The reality is, historically, driving as a vocation has not received societal acceptance, or has always been seen as a vocation which you adopt because you're nothing, may not have other things to pursue. One of the things we have clearly tried to do is to, through multiple touch points, bring a certain degree of respect to the vocation itself. Now, this is a prime example of something which is the right thing to do, both for the community, but also for the business, right? When you create a vocation, give this vocation respect, it not just increases the pride of the person, it also increases pride of potential other people who are trying to join the platform, and more of them are happy to join the platform. I think the last kind of principle around this, which we have translated the concept of driver partners to reality, is also around, can we have, recognizing they're individual entrepreneurs, how do we do the balance between our obligation was for our driver partners? Now, here's a prime example, again, fresh out of mind, on COVID. Now, COVID led to a dramatic impact on driver earnings, right? The business was shut down because of government regulations. And many of our driver partners were impacted, and they're no longer able to get access to their weekly or monthly earnings. So I think we can't, for multiple months, fund 100% of their earnings from our pockets, because that's not just sustainable. 500,000 driver partners, and the scale is just humongous. But what we could do is use our scale to make a difference on multiple fronts. One is, we worked with the government authorities and banks to get waivers on EMIs, which allows the driver partners to not have cost obligations when we're not having revenue during that period. We created what we call a Uber Care Driver Fund, where Uber said, we are going to, from our pockets, fund 25 crores of capital in that fund, and then go back to our riders and try and raise another 25 crores through them, and take this money and put it in driver partners' pocket. It is not going to be enough because of the scale where we operate. Then maybe it can put 4 weeks worth of groceries on in the house of the driver partner, which has got impacted. So again, it comes down to, in those moments, are we able to play that role? The trade-off, honestly, comes down to moments where you have to make that judgment on how much can we do by ourselves, because at some point there is a limitation on how much an Uber can fund from its own balance sheet. But being able to do the right thing as many times as we can is a core ethos we try and live by. Do we honestly succeed all the time? No. There are, if you go and poll drivers, I would argue X percentage of them would say they are unhappy, right? Or they would want Uber to do more. But there will also be an X percentage of drivers who will actually be extremely grateful and thoughtful on how Uber treats them. So I think it's a journey, but at least it gives us a core principle to try and live by when we wake up and come to work every morning.
So I think one of the other aspects of this discussion has to be on the structures of these two different entities that we talked about, which is the business and the social businesses. Now, this question is to Vishnu. Look, is there a specific structuration that Ashoka is looking in social entrepreneurs or social enterprises, which is not very common in a normal business world? And is there a value for or what is the value that Ashoka attaches to a specific structure of decision making, or structure of implementation of things, or structure of, let's say, authority? Is there something that Ashoka specifically looks at when the word social entrepreneurs or entrepreneurship comes into the mind?
Yeah, thank you. I think, we as Ashoka pay a little less emphasis on how the organization or how the entity is structured or how the management team actually gets structured, but rather we pay a lot of attention to who is part of the structure, right? So I think we are probably more driven by the fact of who is playing this role in the team and what is the qualities they bring to the table. So, for example, I think the most important quality we are looking for is, being an entrepreneur, obviously. The reason why being an entrepreneur, not just the person who's leading it, right? We really want to feel that everybody who's around the table is truly bringing the entrepreneurial spirit to the table. right? And also Ashoka's vision, as you know, is everyone a change maker. And when we say a word change maker, the change maker is basically a person who questions the status quo, right? So if you have a stakeholder group, or if you have any group of people coming together, if everybody is at least, brought together with the spirit of saying, can everybody in the group question the status quo? Can everybody own a part of the change and take ownership of the change? Can everybody bring a new innovative idea to the table to do that? Then I think, we are having a very different group of people here. Now, obviously, because we work across the world, every country or every city or even sometimes every state, like how we have in India, have different restrictions to how the entities and the people need to be structured, right? So, for example, in India, if you have a not-for-profit organization, a charity registered as a charity, you can't take an equity into a company, right? So, for example, today it's becoming more and more needed where people are tired of just being dependent on philanthropy to do their work. So they want to set up an entity which will be a for-profit entity, right? Now, today in India, structurally, you cannot have these two entities connected. Like, the for-profit and the not-for-profit cannot be connected. It has to be completely independent, totally arm's length. Even the directors cannot be common, etc., etc. So people have to really reinvent on how they would structure. But for us, for example, in the US, you can have any form possible. Like, the for-profits can own a not-for-profit. The not-for-profit can own a for-profit. You can transfer money freely between countries. But in India, for example, a not-for-profit cannot transfer funds outside India. So there are restrictions which will kind of, we'll have to overcome structurally. So I would say that, rather than focusing on institutional structures, I think we are more interested in focusing on who comes into the play and how do we structure the group, I think is a lot more important.
Yeah, on that thought, Rohan, I have the question to you. Now,
yes, please.
One, of course, regarding the structure of the skill mission that you were heading before, and also on the thought process from the bureaucratic and the government side about how this social enterprises or entrepreneurship as a knowledge body or as an industry as such, how it has to be supported. I mean, is there a general understanding within the bureaucratic fraternity about how do we go forward and support this specific entities?
Okay, so when we talk about setting up of the skill mission which I'm heading as MD, so it's structured as a Section 8 company. It is a not for profit with a social objective, as opposed to a Section 7 company. Now, so it has its own board, which is headed by the Chief Minister, and then you have a series of bodies which are kind of which have delegated powers, right? So you have a cross-departmental body, you have an executive body, and then you have another subcommittee under the Chief Secretary. So you have these till and all the way up to the board. However, let me be very, very frank with you. Would it have been different for me had it been structured as a conventional department? I don't think so. I don't think so. It would have mattered at all, because in government, even if the matter goes to the board and all, you still have an administrative secretary through whom you have to get your permission. So in this particular context, because we are not a profit-making organization like, say, the Road Transport Corporation or the Tourism Development Corporation, that's not our objective here. So I don't think in this particular case it would have really made a big difference if I was structured as a conventional department, say. Okay. However, coming back to the point which Vishnu said, what is important is who do you have there. Now, even if you look at the structure of my organization, I have very few conventional government regular employees. I don't have that. I have a set of, because this is an organization which was set up in the year 2015 towards the end of 2015, because the skill, as soon as Government of India formed the Skill Ministry in 2014 as a separate entity, then all the state governments followed suit. But so I don't have any fresh recruitments which were done purely, career people who are going to, start their career here and end it here. I don't have that. So in government, I have certain people who I have taken. I have 3 consultancy firms who are working alongside us. We have somebody looking as the project management cell, which is headed by one of the consultancies. We also have somebody who's into a QA firm, which is looking into quality of skill infrastructure construction wise, the QA firm. We also have somebody for monitoring and evaluation. Okay. Now, we cannot keep them indefinitely. They are there as long as we have the Asian Development Bank project, which ends sometime in the year 2022. Alongside this, on the government side, we have people who are, a person like me who's from the IAS, is heading the organization. Then we have certain people there in the organization at various levels who have come in from other departments. We have people from technical education, we have people from rural development, we have people from general administration, we have people who have come in from, people, and then we've also hired a few people, but they're not regular government employees, they're on contract with us. So this is the new thinking, this is the way, government is also evolving that, why do we need to go down this creation of posts? You create posts, then you have recruitment and promotion rules, then you then you have this long-winded, you deal with all the pulls and pressures which are associated with traditional government recruitment. So, so to give you a nutshell, that is how we are structured. Now, the second question which you would ask me is that that how does the government machinery essentially look upon how do you see this structure evolving going forward? So the way I look at it is this. I look at it as this, that I have noticed, and I've been in this role for the last 2 years, one constant source of pressure which is there, a source of conflict in the organization is people, the government employees saying, oh, these consultancy firms are getting paid so much, why are we paying them so much? And so why are we not we should make them work even on Sundays, etc., not realizing that it's not that poor employee is getting all the money which we're paying to the consultancy firm. On the other hand, the consultancy firms have their own issues. There are basic cultural issues which I see in this one big challenge I see, because many of the people who were in our organization were from, we worked in government for 20 years, 25 years, and now they're dealing with people who are much younger than them, on paper supposedly getting paid so much more than them. And so you have this bringing together of 2 different cultures actually, which is a challenge in an organization like this. However, I think what is important here is that you have people heading the organization who are open to both, who don't have any biases of their own. So that's very, very important. Even if they are, they should be able to thrash these differences out. So I have, over a period of time, made a very conscious decision that I want younger people in my organization. I even told the government that I want younger people to be posted as general managers, because they are more open to discussion. That is what I have found. So that is something which I made a very conscious effort, to do that. But it doesn't always get done, because in government you don't choose your team. You don't have the luxury to do that. The only thing, is there's a joke in government that what can you actually give your subordinates in government is a good ACR, which often doesn't count for anything, and maybe allow him holidays on time. That's it. If you think you can even deduct 1 rupee, or you can throw a person out very easily, it doesn't happen in government, because you suddenly realize that you're fighting a battle which is not worth fighting at all. So that is the way I look at it. Now, talking about the future, so I feel that some of the skills which these private firms get long, I would want people to pick these skills up. So monitoring and evaluation skills, basic, analytical skills. Even, unfortunately, at times, even the quality of staff in government, as I've said, is not always what you get to choose, right? So they need, not only do they need a lot of confidence building in terms of actual output, but also you need to make them feel that this is important for them to carry on in the organization. So this is a challenge. This is a challenge for us. So, but going in the future, you must understand that the government in states like ours, and even in all other states, but especially in hill states where you don't have a very vibrant private sector, the government job is the ultimate prize for anybody, right? So there is this thrust on government all the time to create employment in the state sector, because once a person gets it, it's a cash flow for life for the person, and it also kind of is a political imperative. I don't know. I think Kerala would be definitely a bit better because it does have a private sector, but it also has that. I was talking to some people in Kerala, and they said there was this challenge there as well. So, but do I see this kind of structure being taken up on a very, very big scale? I don't think so. I don't think, at least in our government, the state government here, as of now, I would not say this structure will be encouraged too much in the future. There's a reason for it, because we are able to sustain this structure also because we have a externally aided project which is funding it. Otherwise,
Rohan, I'm sorry to.
Yeah.
So I understand that probably the nutshell of what you're saying is you see this change of structures really good, but if I ask you, is this going to happen in the next near future? It's going to be
this is not going to be the template which will be like copied everywhere. That's not going to happen. Not in government.
For the entire benefit of the entire other participants as well, with this webinar or panel discussion, my idea was to discuss 4 different themes about this blurring lines between social and businesses. The first theme was on the stakeholder value creation, or the value creation as such. We discussed about the Uber, how we would want to create or has a opportunity to create more value, which they accidentally stumbled upon with the Uber Medic. And the other section was the aspect of stakeholder management, how different entities define stakeholders and how this stakeholder management can be shared, or the knowledge can be shared within both the kind of entities. The third one we just discussed upon on the structures regarding, is there a conducive structure which is beneficial for both entities to each other. And the last segment of this discussion is around the capital or the venture capital or the capital raising processes. Now, I want to start with Prabjeet. Look, we have all seen good VC firms looking for an ROI from a social entity, but we haven't seen a lot of firms integrating the social value creation in their valuation processes. So maybe if you could just reflect upon this from your McKinsey experience, wherever you have tried to strike a deal with VCs or different angels or private equities. Why is the private equity or the venture people are not looking at this integration of social values also into their frameworks?
I think it's an interesting question, and I'm not sure I have the depth of expertise to comment on how the PE and the VC players think around some of this. But at least in my experience, what I've observed is as custodians of other people's funds, right? As a limited partnership, as a PE firm or a VC firm, you are obliged to truly reflect what the aspirations of your core stakeholders is. In that case, it starts off being the objective of who's the fund behind. What I've seen differences is depending on who the core investors are. In certain cases where I have seen investment firms which have large socially oriented organizations supporting them, pension funds, people who are designed with a certain core philosophy, that begins to reflect on how the investors also then look at it. So I don't think there is one size fits all, but it often is a reflection of the core philosophy which the funders are providing. I think the second is again, it would be a misstatement to say that the ROI on the social investments are not taken into consideration. I believe they're taken into consideration, but the metrics used are different. The metrics used often when an investor is looking at a investment case, one of the biggest things they ask is there a challenge where the company is doing something which is not consistent with the sustainability agenda? Or are there stakeholders, for example, the community, which can lead to a significant backlash downstream if you do not do the right thing? And they often end up using that as a risk assessment scenario, if not as a positive ROI contributor to the discussions. I've seen, for example, conversations where the players were looking for an investment into a very simple cash management company, right? Which was kind of managing cash transactions. Such another questions the investors asked was, all the numbers are great, but this is a company which transports so much of cash in vans every day, hundreds and thousands of vehicles traveling every day. What is their carbon footprint, right? And is that something which they are doing something to solve for? Because if that doesn't happen in the right way, in 3 to 4 years' time, when the exit window comes for the investor, there is a likelihood that some regulations would have come in and there will be liabilities they'll have to carry. So I do think in different forms they are looking at it. I think we are looking to the management world, I would argue, which is academicians like you, to actually give a framework which can be used in an objective manner, which is measurable. And I'm sure more and more people can adopt that.
Great. My final question on this the interactive panel discussion would be to Mr. Vishnu. Don't go away, Pradeep, we have question answer session coming up. Vishnu, we see or hear a lot of high net worth individuals or millionaires or billionaires pledging their money for philanthropic purposes. But that is not sending the signal to the other public. My expectation is that if that is happening, there will be a lot of VCs or PEs solely looking for social ventures with those monies coming in. Now, is that a true statement in the first place? And if that is true, what could be those reasons?
So I think there are two parts to your question, right? So one is obviously the, how much money is actually truly being available in the market for quote unquote impact investment, right? So I think the good news there is that the money available in the social investment space in India is been growing very significantly. So, for example, a McKinsey study in 2018 said that, there is almost $5.2 billion invested into the space by just the 50 or 60 investors from 2010. So in 8 years, they had invested $5 billion and it was growing at 14% annually. So I think it shows that institutional investment is coming up, and that's really positive. Now, the second dimension of your question is about individuals, right? See, individuals are always driven by emotions, so you have to, something has to touch a chord in your heart to kind of open your wallet, right? So that's what individuals need. And so, I think the amount of investment which is going into individual social organizations which touch somebody's heart, I think it's still going on. There is no question. And in my opinion, in India, the culture is when you're giving to charity, you don't talk about it a lot. Whereas the culture externally is, when whatever you do, you talk about it, right? In India, I know of many, many, many rich families, wealthy individuals who secretly donate to people, to charity, and then they quietly do it, in a way. So I think, there is this dichotomy of how much you talk about it, how much you don't talk about it. Institutional investment is growing and not growing. I think institutional investment is definitely growing. But whereas, individual giving is also pretty high in India, but may not be as public as probably we want it to be. But these are all positive sides. So, I think we can be happy that things are improving, but there is still room for a lot more.
Great, thanks, Vishnu. So with this, we have come to the discussion from the panelists. Now the floor is open for questions from anyone. Those who want to shoot a question, please unmute yourself and shoot a question. And if you are more comfortable with the chat window, I'm also tracking chat here. So the floor is open for questions from everyone.
Hi, this is Krishnan. This is a very enriching discussion. My question is to Vishnu. Vishnu, you mentioned that a lot of institutional investments coming into social entrepreneurship is concentrated on 50 or 60 donors. The flow of money, are the recipients or recipient economies or countries, are they also concentrated similarly?
Yeah, so this particular number I gave you, Krishnan, was primarily India. Globally, I think, impact investing is supposed to be growing by $300 billion by 2020. By this year, it should cross $300 billion. So I think when we talk about impact investing in India, yes, maybe I'll maybe take your question one more step below by saying who are the people who receive this, right? Obviously countries can receive it, and obviously the global south is where the investment is going from a global perspective. And if you take India, still there is a problem that these monies do not go to the most rural parts of India. It is still not going. I think it is still going to urban areas and maybe semi-urban areas, tier 2 cities, but may not be tier 3 and rural areas. That's all obviously a challenge because, access to some of these funds are connected to what is available and who's dealing with it, etc. That is a problem still we need to solve. But I'm beginning to see a lot more smaller entities who take this money and sort of distribute it to the local areas. So I'm not sure if you've come across an organization called Will Grow, in Chennai. So Will Grow basically takes money from some of these larger organizations and kind of make sure that it goes to the villages or entrepreneurs in the rural areas as well. So that is growing, but there's a big opportunity there for an upswing there, in my opinion.
Yeah, the floor is still open. I mean, anybody can post a question on a chat or directly shoot the question. Yeah, I think people are more or less content with what we discussed, and I think I can only safely assume that whatever we discussed has gone into the right frame of mind, and people have understood, or at least people have at least started thinking about the context of this webinar. Yeah, there's one chat coming up. The question is from Isaac. How does the question is to Prabjit, how does Uber cater to driver partners now that they are rendered jobless?
I believe the question is more in the context of when the lockdown was on, because now the lockdown is emerging. Obviously, the cities are bouncing back, and as people start traveling, the business will pick up. I think during the lockdown, I think as touching upon it briefly, I won't go into detail. It was obviously an incredibly tough time for driver partners. We recognize that the best thing we can do is to find a way to support them on three fronts, which is while the revenues for them are close to zero, can we create one-off opportunities for at least a subset of the driver partners? So you heard me talk about Uber Medic as a service. We also launched delivery services because people were not stepping out and somebody needed to deliver goods to their household. So we mobilized a lot of our driver partners, cars, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and partnered with third-party providers like Spencer's, Big Basket, and said, look, can we be the delivery partner for you, in the process creating an earning opportunity for the drivers during this period. The second was to say, how do we bring their operating costs down? The biggest cost which a driver partner has is the EMI for the vehicle, which they have to pay. While obviously there was a broader industry-wide mobilization, we worked in the background with multiple financiers to make sure that the EMI waivers can be translated across the board for 3 to 4 months, where the drivers don't have an obligation around those fixed costs recurring. That reduces the pressure. And the third was to provide them a one-off grant. So as of last week, about 100,000 partners actually got money in their bank account anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 rupees per driver partner, so that they can get are able to at least be able to pursue near-term cash crunches they may be facing. And last is, we recognize, given the health crisis, and often many partners do not have access to the best healthcare facilities, we have provided them free of cost from our funded by Uber access to telemedicine support, so that they and their families can, without stepping out, also access some of the healthcare facilities. Now, as I said, is this could we do more? Absolutely. So we are in the process of figuring out what more we can do, but those are some of the things which we have attempted to do, and that is both a social and a business reason to do it. Social reason is absolutely clear, because this is a community which is so suffering, and it's the right thing to do. And from a business perspective, if we take care of drivers during their tough times, the driver partners will make sure when they are back, they are able to provide the service happily and keep the customers happy.
There is one more question on the chat window for everyone. I think the question is specifically on an Indian context of governments or any other incentives promoting investments which are climate friendly. Possibly, Rohan, if you have some of those ideas, if you could touch upon that question from Shafi, that would be nice.
So this is a very specific question about environmental friendly technology. So it's just some vicarious experience, because some of my colleagues have worked in various departments of like green energy departments, like encouraging solar and alternative conventional alternative sources of energy. It's a non-conventional sources, as they call it. So there are a whole, every state has its own schemes. You have a certain percent, you have subsidy schemes, you also have upfront grants. So there are various schemes of this kind, even for various sectors. But coming to this specific point about encouraging investment, one is for environmental purposes, and one is also for socially for activities which have a social goal. We're talking about social enterprises, particularly. Particularly in the context of skilling, I would like to say one thing. How often would you have a government which would give a subsidy to a manufacturer? A direct subsidy, a direct cash subsidy. It won't do that. It will do it in some roundabout way, some excise duty here, something of the sort. But it will not subsidize the purchase of his product. It's not going to tell the customer that I'm going to give you 50% off on if you buy a vehicle from a particular manufacturer. That doesn't happen. But in certain social enterprise sectors, let me give you the example of skilling. Government of India schemes as well as state schemes give 100% subsidy on skilling. So if you avail of skilling from any, for example, the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, for example, or even our Himachal government state schemes, it is zero. You don't have to pay anything. The consumer doesn't pay anything. So the government pays for it. And of course, I'm not saying that this is producing the best outcomes. I'm not saying that. That's a separate discussion altogether. But this is what is happening. So government is encouraging social enterprises in this way directly. And many of these enterprises, so-called social enterprises, Vishnu was speaking about, big investments, these big names. I'm talking about people working in the villages, who are setting up training firms. Very grassroots level stuff I'm talking. Those people are only working with government. And the people who are taking training or skilling from them they're fully government sponsored candidates. So I'm just trying to say that social and government has in a way, I don't know, that in certain sectors, it has very clearly made a very, very, very distinctive move to encourage social enterprise in this manner. So, and the same thing goes, so this is particularly skilling, and the same goes for even people who are manufacturing, CFL bulbs, solar lights, solar panels. So there is definitely, the government is, you have to, I'm not skilled, I'm working, so I'm quoting you the figures. I can't quote it for the other schemes, but very clearly the government's intention is very clear on that front.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Any other queries from the participants, either on the chat window or directly?
I have a last but a general question, Robin. That's why I kept it for the last.
Please.
So the question is general. Anybody can answer. And it is that, these financial markets, they are quite efficient in intermediating this businesses. It means mainstream businesses. But the presence of the social business is extremely marginal in those markets. Are there any ideas, thinkings, or any innovative concepts which we can think of to enhance or to make these social businesses more attractive to the markets? Because there's huge money to be tapped out there.
I think Vishnu is the right person to tackle that question.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think there's been a lot of innovative ideas which have been tried. One idea which I've come across is like how we have a stock exchange for businesses.
Exactly.
Creating a social stock exchange. If you actually go and Google for social stock exchange, you will see that was created. The other thing which is much more closer to where I have worked is, though the markets wise they are marginal, the social organizations may appear marginal. I feel that if you go back to the earlier point we were discussing about how do you actually leverage what they are really good at. In our example, what we did was we understood what they were really good at was for bringing all the buyers of, let's say, a particular product or a service. In our case, it was affordable housing. So we said that these are the group of people who can really mobilize the community much better. How do you actually create a system where they are equally benefiting by doing it? Not as philanthropy, not just as a handout, but how do you really leverage that skill that they have and kind of, treat them as equal partners? So we called it the hybrid value systems, where we bring the right people who can bring together. But your point is right. There is a lot of area for innovation there. But as we discussed also earlier, one last point I want to kind of make is that even Prabjit was saying the same thing. Companies may not call themselves a social organization, but they're solving a fundamental social challenge.
Exactly.
Solving the fundamental social challenge of movement of people. Apple says the same thing. They are solving a fundamental challenge of how people communicate. And so, I think they're all doing that, but I think it's just adding a layer of learning from the ecosystem. Learning from the various stakeholders is the layer which I think needs a little bit more focus.
Okay.
The minute we do that, I think we'll balance it out.
Exactly. So there's a lot of challenge to be there, and there's a lot of exciting activity probably we can think of there. Yeah. So I was thinking of noting a course on it. Probably Professor Nambudiri can help. Thank you for that answer.
By the way, he's our director.
I have one question. Hello, Francis. Can you hear?
Yeah.
Okay. So acquisition and retaining of the talent is the most important challenge while running social business. And I think what are the strategies you apply in your organization to retain maybe the talented people? That is always that is very expensive. And most of the talented people are acquired by maybe multinational companies or other corporates. And we are facing this challenge while running even the hospital in the rural areas. Getting good doctors or nurses is very expensive, and they are actually leaving the organization. So we cannot even provide the service to the needy people. So what are the challenges? What are the strategies, maybe best models available according to your knowledge? Someone can enlighten this area.
Rohan?
Thanks for that. Okay, so we have. I'll quote you examples of you hit the nail on the head. I am facing this problem not in my organization but with my stakeholders for sure. With the small training service providers, this is an issue. So when we analyze that, why is it that I think one is the issue of scale. I think they scale up too fast, and they are not able to back up. They spread themselves too thin. So I think this is one issue which I think. So I think scaling, especially when the grassroots, has to be done very methodically. You need to build up your credibility and then scale up, because what I have found is that last year we had close to 25 training service providers working with us. And today we are down to, I'm only giving figures to as low as 3 people. All others have either not produced outcomes or simply not maintained quality. And worst, what as time goes by, is that once they don't produce outcomes and payments are linked to outcomes in the skilling ecosystem, they're not able to pay salaries and all. And then they start cutting corners by employing poor staff. They cut back on infrastructure. So I think one very clear, but yet there are one or two who have bucked this trend and done fairly well. I think it's a lot to do with not getting too, I shouldn't use the word greedy, but I would say overambitious. I think at the grassroots level, I'm not talking about the big social enterprise, enterprises, but what my experience with them is that they scale up too fast and they don't analyze enough. There's also a lack of mentorship for them. Let's admit that.
Okay. Yes, participants, we are 5 minutes ahead of time. We have used extra 5 minutes. If there aren't any more pressing questions, my chat window is still open. If there aren't any more pressing questions, we can wind it up. Is that a common yes? I think so.
Okay.
Okay. Prab has left already, so he had some prior commitments. Prabjeet, let me conclude this discussion with a vote of thanks with gratitude from Rajagiri Business School. Our director is here. Dr. Sunil is already in the screen. He's already asked the questions. So, on behalf of the director, on behalf of the entire school and myself, let me extend my sincerest gratitude to Rohan, Prabjeet in his absence, and Vishnu. All of them, I know prior. Before coming to Rajagiri, Vishnu was my colleague and boss. Before Rohan, Prabjeet were my batchmates. It was a wonderful time to reunite with my batchmates as well as my friend Vishnu. Thanks, Rohan, for
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you so much.
And thanks Vishnu as well. It was great talking to you again. Rohan, we look forward to have more discussions like this in the future as well, both with Vishnu and Rohan and Prabjeet, and more of my batchmates. Okay. Thank you so much for all participants.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.